Hi there, I'm Randy Gilbert, and welcome to this session of Capital Update. A lot has happened since we had our last taping, and I'm excited today to have Representative Hertaus and Representative Pugh here to help us get through all the happenings that have happened since we taped last. So, Jerry, Cindy, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Randy.
Thanks,
Thank you for having us.
So, I'm amazed, I'm confused, and a little bit irritated by what has happened since we were here last. You know, when we sat here, we talked about the timeline that we had set up as, you know, the House and the Senate, and that we were going to present all these bills early and get things all in place so that we could just, when the last day of session came, we'd go home and start summer, right? A week earlier than everybody else and be ready for Memorial Weekend. And oh my goodness, the final days of session and then the days after session, everything that we thought was going to happen changed. And frankly, I'm amazed at the amount of work and the amount of concessions that had to happen. But that's from an outsider. You know, there's two sides of the story, what we see from what the media has given to us and what we see from the outside and what happens out there. And Jerry, I'm gonna turn it to you to say, what happened to this timeline that we talked about and how did we get to where we are?
Well, it's a good question. Essentially, what did happen is we did have very early committee deadlines that were agreed on between the House and the Senate. We basically moved the work process on a calendar that was going to afford us plenty of time to get everything done during April and May. And you know, when you have two legislative chambers that are in control of the same party, the executive branch, the governor's office, which, you know, we have divided government in Minnesota. The governor, clearly, the title given to it is the bully pulpit, and there's a reason for that. It has the ultimate power on whether something becomes law or not. And the governor knows well, as does any governor, that time is always on their side. If you run the clock out and get down to the last minute, that aids in your negotiating power. And that really was, you know, part of the design of this. We invited the governor.
And part of the DFL then, to try to run the clock out.
Oh, absolutely.
And the governor, I should say.
And in committee and building the omnibus bills, we always had, at least in the House, I believe it to be true in the Senate, but we always had the commissioners sitting at the table. We always invited their comments. We repeatedly asked if they were authorized to negotiate on behalf of the governor. And they were always adding comments of what, you know, they think would work and what won't work and what the department's position would be on these things.
And when you say what works, I just want, for clarity, you're saying what you think the governor will accept and sign versus, so you were trying to present bills that you did all the negotiation up front so that we tried to avoid a special session.
And so we tried to engage not only the administration, but the governor sent his commissioners there. And this was kind of unusual. That they were so involved right through the process because the legislature does the legislating. But nonetheless, that's how the process was moving, and the governor kind of refused to engage during the last half of April and the early part of May, always citing a reason that he's not going to really announce his targets or do whatever is their point of view, the other side's point of view in terms of what their priorities are. They didn't articulate that until finally he was insisting that both the House and the Senate have to agree on joint targets. That came probably in the first week of May, and there was still a reluctance to you know, fully engage. But we kept inviting the governor to do that, and I know the leadership kept inviting them to do that, and those conversations were happening. But it was, you know, an hour here and then you know, off to do something else, and it was just really time management issue to run the clock down.
Wow. Cindy, when I look at where we ended up, and mind you, we're not there yet because there's still a pending lawsuit or something, course of action. I'm amazed at what we had to give up in the bills that passed. I mean, what did we end up having, an 8% increase in our budget from the last biennium?
Well, I think that Representative Hertaus and I would both agree that we're concerned with the growth, you know, the growth of government. I mean, we ended up spending, I think, upwards of $46 billion, and that's way beyond where I was hopeful, you know, we would end up. To your initial comment about your thoughts and concerns about, you know, frustration and confusion and whatnot. I think that's perfectly reflective of where our constituents are at as well, just wondering what happened. The process of compromise is difficult, and I would say just from the perspective in the House, we compromised a lot. Not only we have a 77-member Republican majority in the House, 57 Democrats. And so the bills that we put forward, I believe, were very reflective of the will of the people that elected us. And so therefore, I would conclude that the bills we put forward were, frankly, more conservative than what potentially the Senate, was able to receive. So we compromised with the Senate in a big way as well.
And that's a good point to bring up, because we sit back and we think we own the majorities. But even I forget at times that the majority in the Senate is one.
Absolutely. And so we have a significant majority in the House, and our bills, upwards of 3,000 bills were introduced in the House.
And is that normal? I mean, to me, when you say 3,000 bills, I sit back and think, oh, good Lord.
Well, actually, I asked the chief clerk about that early on in the session, and I followed up on that, and it is a record. A huge number of bills were introduced this year, more so than any of the last bienniums that I've been a part of, certainly, but even before our tenure in the legislature. So, we worked really hard and put forth some great omnibus bills, but again, there's a one-member majority in the Senate. And so not only were we compromising with the Senate prior to the negotiations and further compromise with the governor, but there were challenges which you may have alluded to with a number of senators not being present. One senator was out for key time in the last 2 weeks of in and out of the legislative session with and then the ultimate passing of her father. So it was very difficult. It was just another complexity that made our work that much more challenging.
Right. So, I mean, that is something that people need to keep in mind. Again, I lose sight of that as well at times, thinking, okay, you have to compromise. I am somewhat amazed that the two leaders, Gazelka and Doubt, were not working a little bit more closely to say what can we push forward and what can we think. And maybe they were, and this is just the nature of politics that all of us forget about, because we think, it's like sitting around the table and, you have a discussion with your wife or your partner or whatever, and in 10 minutes you've realized this is what's best for the House, our House, not the House of Representatives. So it was shocking, but what's more shocking, and I don't know if the media, and I feel like I'm being President Trump right now with fake news or whatever, but the media was portraying it like we had deals happening and that compromise was being happening. They would listen to Doubt, they would listen to Gazelka, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, I'm not saying Senator and Representative or Speaker of the House, but it seemed like we had deals done. Then we still had to go to special session, and then it was obvious that you guys waited around for that first special session because there's all this administrative items that have to happen. But then the final bills get presented to the governor, and it sounded like everything was okay, and he vetoes items and line vetoes and sends out 10 different letters that basically scolded you guys for not giving him what he wanted.
Well, I think leading up to that, we had a term we used frequently when discussing the negotiations and the progress with the governor is that he kept moving the goalpost. Mm-hmm. Every time we came to kind of a global agreement and we thought everything was done and agreed to, then when we came back with things kind of in final form, then there was one more demand, keep moving the goalpost, and it was kind of articulated that the field looked like Swiss cheese, that there were so many holes
sure.
in the field.
Right.
And so it's very frustrating. And for the folks back home, each time you think you've got a bill in its final form, if you pull something out or add something in, now it changes the specific language of the bill. The bill has to be re-engrossed. The pages all have to be renumbered. This can be a very cumbersome process with the revisor's office, as well as reintroducing them or sending them to conference committee. Can sometimes take up to 12 hours to re-engross a bill and to get it all in final form so that this is in the final presentation package. We get all the way through that, and then all of a sudden we need something else. And ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, the bully pulpit is the bully pulpit. Not going to sign unless I get this. So ultimately, we thought we had final agreement, but the clock did run out.
So the governor and his commissioners and staff would say, we need this change. So then it has to come back to the House and the Senate, and you guys all agree. It has to go back and to get recommissioned, I think is what you said, and everything gets renumbered, and then it's re-presented back to the governor, who can then come back and say, I don't like this section, and the process starts over again.
Well, and one of the things that happened is some of the rhetoric we heard on the news a lot of time is the administration was saying, well, there's all this policy in the finance bills. I'm only going to deal with the finance bills first, and then we'll deal with the policy second. But it's always been the history of the legislature to have policy provisions in the finance bills. And ironically, the administration and the governor complained about all the Republican policies in the finance bills, complaining that there were more than 500 provisions of policy in all of these bills. But in the tax bill alone, there were over 300 policy provisions that were sponsored by the administration. So
their policy was fine, but our policy was
their
not.
policy provisions were in the tax bill. So
Disingenuous.
it was a disingenuous claim, and
Interesting.
finally we got through those issues.
Well, and to Jerry's point about policy, for the billions in incremental growth of government, of course there's going to be policy. Of course there's going to be reform that Republicans would propose to right our state, in our opinion, again, reflective of the will of the people
Sure.
that elected us. So of course there's going to be policy provisions in every one of our omnibus bills. An omnibus bill is nothing but individual bills that were sponsored by members, went through the committee process, had complete vettings that are all laid over in committee for possible inclusion in this omnibus bill. So then when the bill is put together, it is a big combination of policy and finance, and
Sure,
that
it's
is
a
what
hot dish of everything.
that is what these bills are. And
So it's just been amazing to me, because as much as I have watched it, this is the first time I've seen anything this crazy, happen in the last bit. I want to finish this section with ending the fact that, now we sit on the doorstep of a lawsuit. The governor line item vetoed, as he was doing this, the appropriations to keep your branch of government running.
yes.
Which, from my perspective, I sit back and I think, this feels like the mafia. You're not going to play, we're going to take your money away. And it's crazy for me to say that, but that's exactly how it feels. This is not the three-legged stool of government that we grew up learning in social studies in second, third, fourth, fifth grade, that each body is supposed to have its equal power and understanding that all three need to come together. Yeah. He's stripping the power away from one, saying, you're not doing what I want to do, you're going away, which he's not really saying that, but he's saying, I'm going to limit your ability, right?
Well, I'm going to defund you, not only for the upcoming biennium, but for the out biennium as well. So for 4 years, and my understanding is that it's the entire legislature, it's staff, it's the attorneys,
right.
it's all of us. And this, in my opinion, and the opinion of so many others, entirely unconstitutional. First of all, to line item a provision in an omnibus finance budget bill, that is unconstitutional.
Well, I know there's precedents for this as well, as we've talked about as well. So how does he back off from this? I mean, in the past, the governor would try to act tough, and he's doing what he's supposed to do, so I don't hold anything against him. I did not like seeing all the DFL representatives veto the bills and everything when we're in special session, looking to prolong this whole thing. But it seems to me like court is the only option now. He has forced us to go to court.
Yeah, and I think that's correct, because the governor does have the authority on appropriation line items only, to line item veto on appropriations only, not on policy. And so that having been done, he felt he was within the authority to make that veto of an appropriation. But what he didn't consider is that there is separation of powers, and the core function of government includes the legislature and the representatives of the people, both in the Senate and the House. This has been tried in New Mexico, it's been tried in Illinois. The precedent has already been established. It clearly is unconstitutional. There's not any question in my mind how the court will rule on this, and I don't really believe that we'll be going to a special session to resolve this in terms of acquiescing to additional demands, because that's the reason he did it. He clearly, openly stated, if you want your money back, you've got to go back in and change the things that I've already signed into law.
Right. I mean, it's, I
And
mean,
so that-
frankly, it feels like a little bit like bullying as well, where
Yeah.
he's, I mean, and again, that's negotiation. Everybody can look at that any way they
Well,
want.
we did have an anti-bullying bill back in 2013.
Well, that's
Right.
what I was actually softly
That title's
referencing
already
that I
been
thought
taken.
was kind of interesting with this whole thing is it was totally
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
And I know that if the roles were reversed, we would be looked at as the evil power that's trying to take things away, and I just find that really interesting.
Well, and to the point that Jerry just made about those provisions that the governor says that he wants, in fact, we already compromised other policy provisions in order to put those in. There was agreement. And so now if he wants those, it's opening up the whole negotiation again. And
And I hope
that's
that we
just-
don't do that, because the precedence has been set here that it's not going to be kind to anybody if we do this. So we have a lawsuit coming up. That's the only way that's going to resolve it.
I think so.
Hopefully, we follow precedence on this. And I said hopefully as somebody that, you know, I don't want to see this be prolonged any further than it is. The funding appropriation occurs, you know, gets reinstated, and then everything else stays the same, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. You know, I just, the other part that was amazing to me, and we're going to run to break here then, is that, you know, all those, you know, letters came out, and then the scuffle that happened after, like when he wasn't going to sign the one bill where these line item, well, he didn't line item, those he signed, but he wasn't going to sign certain bills saying, I'm not going to sign it, but that would have actually let it be a veto, and the Attorney General had to come out and say, no, you have to sign. I mean, I thought it was almost like a child on the playground. And I know there's a lot of our viewers that are not going to like that I'm saying that, but that action that occurred, the governor making these statements, the backfill that occurred by his own party, and we sit here right now. It's just not the way I want to see our government running, and it's frustrating. I'm going to end this session with that for me saying, or this segment. It's frustrating to see that this has to happen this way.
Okay.
So, you know, we're going
Agreed.
to go to break, and when we come back, we're actually going to talk about some of the good things that came out of the session. Both the representatives had items that came through that they were passionate about, and we'll talk about that and what we're going to have going forward. So stay tuned.
LMCC HD is here. Here's how you can watch our Government Channel 8 in high definition. If you have a cable-ready TV, you can watch us on Mediacom Channel 8.1. And if you have a set-top box, you can watch us on Mediacom Channel 808. Your community TV, now in HD.
Well, welcome back. As we went to break, I was a bit more than spirited about the way that the governor had signed and not signed some items and line item vetoed. But I think it deserves a little bit more attention here that, you know, about what occurred there with the tax bill. And Jerry, versus me trying to explain it, you're always more eloquent and more informed with this information than I am. I'm going to turn it to you just to talk a little bit about, you know, what occurred in the last minutes and where we are today.
Well, thank you, Randy. And on the tax bill, not only do I serve on the full tax committee, but as a conferee in the tax conference process. And so I was very passionate about the tax bill and had several provisions in it, so I did follow it. What is very confusing for just about everybody, including members of the legislature, is that when you have a special session, it is uniquely different than the regular session. In the regular session, we got about half of all of the finance bills and policy bills were completed in the regular session. And in that manner, in a regular session, once we conclude that, and we don't go sine die, which means with no future date of coming back, we just adjourn till February 20th of 2018. And the Constitution prohibits a regular session from meeting again after the first Monday after the third Saturday in May. So we can't meet until at least January 1 would be the
If we
earliest.
sine die.
No, if in our regular session. We
okay.
can't meet until 2018.
Okay.
That's the Constitution. But then because we can't meet again, that's the reason we have a special session. And the governor had done negotiations about the final things, and it took time to re-engross these bills, which we talked about. And so it was necessary to have this special session to finish the other things. In a special session, the 3-day rule in terms of a law or a bill becoming law in 3 days if the governor doesn't act on it, that only applies in a regular session. In a special session, which concludes sine die, meaning there's no future date that you're coming back, The governor has 14 days to act on it, and if he signs it, fine. If he doesn't sign it, if he refuses to do anything with it, it becomes automatically vetoed in 14 days, unlike a bill out of special session. If he does nothing in 3 days, it automatically becomes law. So that's the difference. Sine die is the operation. So the governor came out around 5 or 6 o'clock p.m. After session had concluded, and he had signed all the bills within the 3 days, Tuesday at
bills
midnight.
that he was going to sign.
Everything he was going to sign, he had signed everything he was going to sign, and then he made a rather spirited discourse about his agitation over the tax bill, and he wasn't going to sign it. He said he wasn't going to veto it either. He said he wasn't going to veto it because he didn't want to put the Department of Revenue out of business and send all those people home. On the other hand, he said he was going to let it become law by refusing to sign it in 3 days. The governor clearly didn't understand the Constitution, was ill-advised by his own staff about how that operation works. So he made those statements around 5 or 6 p.m. Later that evening, the Attorney General advised him that you better sign the bill if you really want to keep these people going, and so he reversed his decision completely, and I was notified around 11 p.m. That evening that the governor had now in fact signed the bill. I was very much involved in notifying the entire membership about the Constitution and that the governor's wrong and that he needs to sign this bill or, it's over. So anyway, he did reverse his decision, and so it did become law, and there was over $650 million of tax reductions and policy changes with regard to our taxes in Minnesota, the largest tax cut in more than 20 years. So I'm very proud that that got done.
And that is a good thing. I mean, with the billions that we sit in our coffers that we've over-collected to get tax breaks to certain groups and different things. I mean, I'm not doing a great job with this. That's a very good thing to come out of here, that we're giving the money back to the individuals and in places that it needs to be brought back in.
Yes.
And I would actually say, versus getting into this right now, if people have questions about that, they should contact one of you two to find out, does this tax bill affect me, and how does it affect me, and what could I expect going forward? Because there's so many different sections to it, it would be too hard to dissect that right now. So that's one good thing. Representative Pugh, we let Jerry talk about that. There's some things that I know that we've talked about in the past and offline that you were pretty excited about that were going on in this session. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
One thing that I'm very pleased about is the almost $1 billion bonding bill. And I'm pleased about it because we didn't have a transportation bill at the end of last biennium, and this bill is laden with really meaningful road and bridge infrastructure projects, specifically Highway 12, Highway 212. Both of those are really meaningful, it will be, to our area, and I'm just really pleased about that. I'm also excited about our upcoming first in Minnesota bicentennial of Fort Snelling. And the visitor center and some of the original structures at Fort Snelling, historic Fort Snelling, are in the process of, we're going to be entering the engineering phase of the design. And so there's $4 million, it's not a lot, in an almost $1 billion project, but we're going to be celebrating our bicentennial. And to me, preserving history is very important. The seed money for this project is, to me, akin to the renovation over $300 million of the state capitol, which, if our viewers haven't been to the state capitol in the last 6 months since it's been reopened, they'll definitely want to be there. It is just spectacular, so I'm excited about that.
And I would think the summer would actually be a good time to go to the Capitol when things slow down a little bit and you can actually enjoy it without the protesters and everything else that were so prevalent there this session.
It's just amazing and so beautiful, and everyone will really enjoy it.
Well, and we talked about this offline. I'm happy that Fort Snelling is getting some attention. I lived close to Fort Snelling, and it always hurt my feelings to watch those buildings become dilapidated, and there's a lot of history involved at Fort Snelling, and it's Minnesota history, as you so eloquently stated, Cindy, and it's great to see it. And $4 million is a lot of money. While relative to $1 billion, it's not. We can do a lot with $4 billion, so that'll be exciting to see. Jerry, how about you?
Well, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of good things that happened, as Cindy had mentioned, with regard to the bonding provisions. There's also $71 million for quiet zone or rail grade crossing improvements across the state. We've got a couple of major rail lines that are running through our district here, and some of our cities should be able to access some of those funds in terms of making those improvements as well. We've certainly worked hard on Highway 12 for the last 3 years. The Highway 12 Coalition, we've been meeting on a regular basis every month and advancing the progress of the deadliest highway in the state of Minnesota, with more than 25 fatalities in the last 5 years on this stretch of road. And last year, through all of the efforts of that group, we were able to get the Jersey Wall constructed from Wayzata to County Road 6.
Correct.
And I had reintroduced legislation as I had done in the past. Leadership was committed to making sure that we would get money for Highway 12. I was very involved with leadership in getting a commitment from them that this would be in the final form. They asked me to keep the legislation open, every channel, every option, that they would have flexibility. That meant both in the transportation bill and in the bonding bill. Senator Osmek carried both sides in the Senate for me. I delivered those bills. I rewrote the bill. And in the end, we got $11.3 million to improve the intersections of County Road 90 and County Road 92 that traverse over 12, which were identified as major critical areas in the crash audit done by MnDOT as to what the problems are on this road. So it's still going to take some time to get that built, to get it designed and engineered and get the right-of-way acquired, but there'll be realignment of these intersections, so I'm proud of that. Also in the tax bill, the benefit was kind of distributed between different groups of people, and $117 million is going to seniors with regard to their Social Security payments are no longer be subject to state income tax for receiving those payments. It begins to become phased out at $77,000 of household income and is totally eliminated at $99,000. Also had a provision, HCMC is a big welfare hospital. 75% of all of its receipts are Medicare and Medicaid receipt payments, meaning that Hennepin County taxpayers are picking up a huge cost there because of the marginal payments that are received, just a fraction of full fee for service. Unfortunately, because of this disproportion, and they were also having to pay the 2% provider tax on these reduced reimbursements. So where the federal government maybe gives them 78%, 78 cents on every dollar for that service, then they had to pay another 2% provider tax on that, which reduced it to 76. That's ultimately levied on Hennepin County taxpayers. So that provision also passed, and some ag preserve things as well.
I say this every time. We should make this an hour show because we're out of time right now, and there's so much more that we'd love to talk about. I do want to thank both of you for showing up here today. You know, listeners, as always, if there's a question that you have from this or any time, the representatives and Senator Osmek is always available for you. I believe we're running their contact information here, but if not, you can Google each of them and find them. They want to hear about you. This session had a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of things that are still going to be resolved after this program airs. But I want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you for being involved, and we'll see you the next time on Capitol Update.